All right, so we want to welcome everybody to the Angular Community Meetup. Today we're doing a pretty special one. We're doing the lightning talk Lollapalooza. So it's gonna be a lot of fun today. I want to thank our sponsors before we get started. Breebug, ngConf, Cypress, STG Consulting, the NgXP podcast, JetBrains, and this.labs. We couldn't do it without all these sponsors, so thank you guys very much. We do have a code of conduct. If one of the other co-organizers could drop that link in the chat, everybody just have a look over it. It's pretty standard. We want this to be a very welcoming place. We don't allow any kind of bullying or harassment. If anything is happening, if you feel uncomfortable, please let one of the organizers know and we will take care of it. I don't think we've ever had an issue in the past, but I do need to bring this up before we get started. All right, so today we will be doing the lightning talk Lollapalooza. I think that's all we have today for our introductions. It looks like Jason is going to be late, so does somebody else want to introduce me? I'll be the first talk today.
I'll do it. Just let me pull up the paper real quick.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. All right. So Chris is going to talk today about conditional validators in reactive forms. He is a senior software engineer at Hero Devs, and Chris has over 13 years experience in full stack software development through various industries and tech stacks. Outside of work, he enjoys the outdoors, including hiking and camping. So we have one question for you real quick, Chris. If you were the captain of a pirate ship, what would you name your ship?
Yeah, this is a tough one. Yeah, Brooke sent this to me last night, so I've been thinking about it. I had two ideas. More on a Angular side, I was thinking like, how can I make this like pirate sounding? So I came up with the route guard.
Ooh, nice. That is a good one. That's much better than I would be able to come up with. So
it's tough. Yeah, I was thinking about it last night at dinner. The other one I thought about was I have a dog named Penny. She goes on all of our outdoor adventures. She's a beagle. So I was thinking like the plundering Penny.
Oh, that's a good one too.
She would be our mascot. She'd be on the flag.
Yeah, those are really good. All right. Well, we will go ahead and turn the time over to Chris and hear what he has prepared for us.
All right. Yeah, so as Preston said, I'm going to be talking about conditional validators in reactive forms today. If you don't know what that is, I will explain with a short story. This is a story about a world famous hacker. We don't know his name, but we do have a photo of him, so please be on the lookout. There's this guy right here. In this story, he was attempting to get into a website, but he was too young to do so without his parents' permission. So he went to the website and he's like, all right, email and age, no problem. So he typed in his email, but as soon as he put in his age, he realized that there was a third form field that appeared asking for his parents' email. And this would send an email to his parent asking for permission. They'd have to confirm it and let him in. So he decided he was going to look at the source code and figure out how this works and see how he could get around it. So he goes to GitHub. It was an open source project, and he found the login form class. And this class just held everything related to the form for the login page. Had two properties, a form group and a minimum age set to 13. And then the constructor is set up the form group with 3 form controls: the email, the age, and the parent email. So let's look at the actual presentational component that displays the login form. All it's doing is injecting that login form class into the constructor, and it has a template. Within the template, we have our 3 form controls. We're using a material or Angular material here, but in the first control for the email, line 2, we have our label. Line 3, we have our input for typing in the email address. And in line 4, we just have an error that would display if the email was not in a valid format or if it was omitted completely. The next control was the age. Again, we have a label, input, and error. Nothing special here, but the third one is the one that is in question. and this is the parent email. So line 3, 4, and 5, again, look the same with the label, input, and errors. But line 1, we have it wrapped in this ng container. And we have an ngIf checking to see if the age that's been set into the age form control is less than the minimum age allowed in the website. And if it is less than that age, then we display the form field. Okay, so the hacker had an idea. He's going to do something that no one's ever done before. He's going to lie on the internet. So he goes to the website and changes the age to 15. The parent email address disappears. He tries to log in, and nothing happens. There's a bug on the site. As you can see in the debug statement below the login button, it says that the form is not valid. So what's causing that? You may have caught this earlier, but when we were looking at our login form class, the parent email does have validators stating that it is required and it requires a valid email address. But in this case, the parent email is not displayed. But the ngIf is taking it out of the DOM, but it's not actually changing the way the form is validated. So we need these validators to be conditional based on what the age is set at. So this is an open source project, so the hacker goes ahead and clones it and starts making some modifications. He takes out the validators from the form control to start with and tries to figure out a way that we can do this dynamically. He introduces the value changed observable onto this class that we will then subscribe to later. And then he starts working on modifying the value changes observable on the age form control to do what he wants. So let's look at this in closer detail. So we get the value changes observable from our age control, and we're going to add a pipe. And this allows us to kind of add in reactive statements when this value changes happens. So as age changes, this gets triggered. And within the pipe, we can introduce the tap operator and take that age value and do something with it. And inside of here, we're going to set our validator logic. So the first thing we need to do is grab the parent email control from our form group. And then we just need to do a simple if statement. If the age is set and it's less than the minimum age allowed, we set the validators just like we did before. We have the required validator as well as the email validator. Otherwise, if the age is greater than or equal to the minimum age, we're going to clear the validators. The next thing we need to do is we need to tell Angular that these validators have changed and we need to update the validity of the parent email control. So we can just call the update value and validity function on that control. So this keeps everything within our form class. And within our presentational component, we're already injecting this into the component, and we need to subscribe to that observable. Instead of doing it in TypeScript, we can just simply put it into an async pipe on the template. This will allow Angular to handle subscribing and as well as unsubscribing, making sure that it's destroyed once this component is gone and preventing any kind of memory leaks. So once this PR was up there and merged, the hacker changed his age to 15, the form was valid, and he was able to log in. And that's it for conditional validators. I wanted to thank you guys for listening, and thank you to the meetup to allow me to speak today. Now I'll answer any questions. And if anybody wants to look at the source code for a project I used to build this, you can find it on my GitHub.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris. That was great. I've used conditional validation like that before, and it's super helpful. So thanks for doing that and showing everyone.
Yeah, no problem.
Chris, some people are asking while you're doing that, what VS Code theme you're using.
I was actually using carbonnow.sh just for the examples. So I think it was one of the default ones there. It wasn't actually in VS Code.
Perfect.
All right. If there's no more questions, we can move on to our next speaker. Hey, Marko, how's it going?
Hello. It's going good. How are you, Chris?
Doing very well. So this is Marko Stanimirović. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
I tried. So Marko, you are an NgRx action group creator, and you've kind of joined the NgRx core team. Also a senior front-end engineer at JobCloud and an organizer of the Angular Belgrade group. In his spare time, he likes to contribute to open source software, share knowledge through technical articles and talks, and play the guitar.
Yes.
I also saw that you are going to be giving a talk at NgConf this year. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm going to talk about another relatively new feature from NgRx store package called Feature Creator.
Oh, that's very cool. I'm looking forward to it. I know several people on this call will probably be at NgConf, so we'll get to see you there in person. So our icebreaker question for you is, what movie have you watched more than any other movie in your life?
I like Donnie Brasco movie.
Okay, I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, with Johnny Depp.
Oh, Johnny Depp. I'm sorry.
Yeah, with Johnny Depp.
Nice. All right. Well, I will turn it over to you and give you your talk. Enjoy.
Let me just share the screen. Okay. I hope you can see my presentation right now. So as Chris said today, I'm going to be talking about Action Group Creator. We can skip this part because I'm already introduced by our host. So let's first see what is the usual way of creating actions in NgRx. To create an action, or more precisely action creator in NgRx, we can use create action function from NgRx store package. If we want to define an action without payload, we can simply pass action type as an input argument of create action function. If we want to create action with payload, we have two options. First option is to use this props function that is also part of the NgRx store public API. And we need to pass payload type as an input generic argument to this function. And the second, let's say, less popular way of defining an action with payload is to use props factory. So as you can see here, we can pass a callback as a second input argument of create action function. And there are two common ways how we import action files to another files. First common way is to use named imports, like in this example here. And the second way is to create barrel files, define named exports, and then we can use these named exports where needed. But both these ways don't provide, let's say, the best developer experience, in my opinion. Because with barrels, we need additional files in our code base with some repetitive code. When we use named imports, we cannot take advantage of IntelliSense in our IDE because we need to manually type named imports. And if we now go back and take a look again at the actions file, we can here also notice some repetitive code here. For example, we need to copy the same action source for each action in this file. Also, we need to manually enforce source event pattern, as you can see here, for each action. And if we take a look at the event name and action name, you can notice that they are almost the same. So action name is equal to the camel case event name. And what if, for example, we want to create a new action, new products page action? How we do that? Usually we copy the previous action, then change action name, action type, and action props. And when we do that, we can easily forget to change the action type, for example. If we forget to change action type, we will have two actions with the same type, which will introduce potential bugs in our system. But luckily, in development mode, NgRx will throw an error when we try to define two actions with the same type. But it will be much better to get this error at compile time instead of runtime, right? So all these things that I now mentioned, all these disadvantages, let's say, of using create action function can be solved by using a new function from NgRx store package called create action group. This function is imported, of course, from NgRx store package, and it accepts two input arguments. First is source of the particular action group, and the second argument is dictionary of events. Event is a key value pair of event name and event props. In our first example, we want to define action without payload. So to do that with create action group, we can use empty props function from NgRx store package. By the way, this is also a new function from NgRx store. If you want to create action with payload, we again have two options. We can use props function that we previously used with create action. Also, we can use props factory. So this is the, let's say this is what our products page action group contains. So actually this object is generated by the create action group function. And here we have three actions because here we defined three events. As you can see, the name of each action is equal to the camel cased event name. So for pagination changed, we defined pagination changed event here. And everything is strongly typed, of course. If we take a look at the action type, you can see that create action group will apply source event pattern. So we don't need to do that manually anymore. As any solution, create action group has advantages and disadvantages. If we talk about disadvantages, more specific about limitation, with create action group function, we are not able to define an action whose action name is different from the event name, like in this example here. So we can do this with create action group because with create action group, action name is equal to the camel cased event name. Of course, we are able to do this with create action function. If we talk about restrictions, with create action group function, we cannot use, let's say, special characters when we define event name. For example, we cannot use brackets, quotes, or punctuation marks. And in the end, I just want to show you how much code we can reduce by using create action group function. So on the left side, you can see products API actions that are defined by using create action function. On the right side, you can see the same actions that are defined by using create action group function. Thank you very much for attention. If you have any questions, you can ask me in chat or feel free to reach me out on Twitter at MarkoSTDev.
Thank you so much, Marko. I think we did have one question, which was just what version of NgRx is this available in?
It's introduced in NgRx 13.2 version.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're
Great
welcome.
talk. Before we move on, I did want to say just a couple things real quick. We are recording this event, so if you miss any talks or you're not able to finish it, it'll all be available on YouTube sometime in the next week or so. The other thing is just to make it a little bit easier for us to find questions is to use the Q&A section in Zoom. Sometimes things get lost in chat. All right, hand it over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Chris. Today, I get to introduce a good friend of mine, Markus Ingvarsson. He joins us from Sweden. He's a recent graduate of Chalmers University of Technology, and he has a master's in computer science and engineering. During his studies, he started working as a full stack developer at Consat Telematics on the west coast of Sweden. And in his job, he builds tools for fleet and traffic management in Angular and .NET. Besides programming, Markus enjoys traveling and has lived and studied in Canada and Argentina. That's awesome. Do you speak Spanish?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean,
un poquito?
Sí.
That's awesome. Amazing.
Yeah, don't put me on.
No.
No, I can do conversational, but I'm studying it a little to improve. Yeah.
It's amazing. That's awesome. So your icebreaker question is that you live in a beautiful country. Right. Where is your favorite place to visit, and why would you recommend it to other people?
Yeah, so it's tricky. I feel that Swedes are often poor at giving tourist a guide, because they always go other places, because they tend to go to Spain and other stuff. So I had to do some research. I feel like it feels wrong to say that you should go, to the beach and drink apple cider or something. I'm from the south, but I feel like you wouldn't come to Sweden maybe to do that. But it's a common answer, but Stockholm is really nice. Stockholm is fantastic in the summer. It's a great city, and there's lots of things to do. You have the archipelagos, which are really nice. There are many islands you can see. It's really, really pretty. In the winter, I enjoy skiing quite a bit, and there's lots of different skiing resorts and places you can go. In the far north, you have Lapland, and it's cool if you want to experience like a very Nordic experience, with the Northern Lights and all that.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, so many places. Stockholm is a solid choice, but the north is of course to recommend as well. And of course,
awesome.
I yeah.
Well, thank you for the recommendations. Sounds amazing. But I'm going to have time for your talk.
Yeah, for sure. Let me see it. I'm gonna try to share my screen. Okay, so welcome to this talk on dependency injection in Angular. Angular 14 was just released, and it provided some new enhancements to the Angular dependency injection toolkit. And it's been a quite debated topic on social media recently. But how did now dependency injection work in Angular? Maybe you're new to Angular, perhaps you've been avoiding this part of Angular for a while now, or maybe it's been a minute since you dabbled in an Angular project. Either way, it's great to have you here. And after this talk, we will know what is dependency injection and why we may use it, how Angular uses hierarchical injectors to provide dependency injection, and what dependency providers are. So what is dependency injection? It's a design pattern in which a class requests dependencies from external sources rather than creating them themselves. So most things in Angular are simply a class, including modules, components, and directives. And we can inject services in all these different types of classes. And a service could be used to fetch data from a database. You could use it to maintain state across different views. Basically, it helps us to achieve a more loosely coupled application. And a loosely coupled application makes it easier to test it, and it makes it easier to maintain and replace parts of it without having to break it. So this is what our first service might look like. It's just a normal class, in this case, with a method called getAppVersion. And a service needs to be registered somewhere. And in this case, we register it in our providers array in the app module, which is the root module of our application. We can also register a service in the providers array of a component or of a directive. I also want to mention that rather than using the providers array in a module, we may use the injectable decorator and provide a service in the root or in some module. In this demo, we will register services only in the providers array, as I think it helps for the mental model of dependency injection, but one should be aware of this preferred approach, which can take advantage of tree shaking. And here is how we might use a service. We inject the service in our constructor of the app component, and then we instantiate the local variable appVersion in our app component by calling the method getAppVersion from our app service. So instead of making the component having to figure out what version the application is currently running, it delegates this task to our app service. And this service can be used really anywhere in our application, and that's pretty cool. So who provides the service to a component when a component is instantiated? So this is the job of the injectors of our app. And there exist two injector hierarchies in Angular. Modules will only use the module injectors, but components and directives will also use its element injectors. So for a component, Angular will try to satisfy dependencies in its constructor by using its own element injector. So this local injector will see if the service it's looking for exists in the providers array and component decorator. And if this is not the case, it will forward the request to the element injector of the parent component. And this is repeated until we reach the root component. And if no providers were found, our component will attempt to look for the dependency in the module injector hierarchy instead. I want to mention that there can exist child module injectors under the root injector, which comes from other lazy loaded modules, but this is out of scope for today. The root injector will contain all the services that were provided in our root module, naturally. And if the service was not found there, it will check to see if the platform module injector can retrieve the service. This injector contains platform-specific dependencies, and if the dependencies were not found there, it will reach the null injector. And I think many of us has felt frustrated when we started out coding in Angular and were met with this message. You were following along a tutorial, your pizza app is popping, life's good, and bam, all of a sudden everything stops working and you don't know what to do. But now we actually know where this message is coming from. So in this example, none of our injectors were able to find a provided service with a key of app service. And then the request reached the null injector and the null injector threw an exception. And that's pretty much it. So now when we know this fact, we just have to figure out why app service did not get registered in the way we thought it did. So previously, we just added our service in the providers array, but Angular allows us to be more expressive than that. So this is where dependency providers comes into the picture. So line 19 results in the same provider as line 20. The provide property requires a key. This could be a service reference, but it could also just be a normal string. Use class takes a class reference, which is used to instantiate the service when someone tries to resolve the dependency with the key of app service in this case. And that means that the key will kind of only be used as an interface in this case, and the class we give to the use class will be the class that is used inside of the application. And it does not stop there. We can even provide a value, such as an object, or even a function instead of a class. So if we provide a class to use existing instead of use class, rather than creating a new class, we will go and ask for an already instantiated class from the injector. So let's see an example. So here, the key is just a string called API URL. And depending on if we run our app in production mode or not, we can provide a different API URL. So afterward, we can inject the API URL string in feature service perhaps that may need it to fetch data from our database, and it will select the correct URL depending on if we run on a local environment or a production environment. And the fun doesn't even stop there. Sadly, we are running out of time, but Angular also provides something called injection tokens. And we can use the injection token provided by Angular, such as the app initializer, which allows us to call a method as the application is initializing. Here we set the use factory to use our init application method from the app service, and we provide app service as a dependency. And you can create your own injection tokens, and there are many more unique tokens that Angular provides, which I encourage you all to discover for yourself. So now we know that dependency injection is a design pattern commonly used in Angular, which helps us to create loosely coupled architecture, allowing us to build more maintainable apps. Angular uses a hierarchy of injectors to retrieve any injected service to provide services on many different hierarchical levels. And dependency providers can be used to reconfigure services, which is an important tool when building great apps. So for further reading, you should all definitely check out these sources. The Angular documentation provides some fine examples. The coded frontends playlist on dependency injection is an excellent source if you want to dig down more deep in any of the covered topics today. And Kevin Koiso also have a really good video on how we can use the inject function in Angular 14. Please contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn if some questions were left an answer, or here in the chat, of course. And thank you all for listening.
Excellent job, Markus. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Good explanation in 10 minutes of dependency injection. So
yeah, it was rough. I hope I got at least like a bread first dive into the topics. And please check out the other sources. They're fantastic. And if you want to discuss more later, I would love to talk to you about the different topics.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are moving on to I've looked up, I'm trying to figure out how to pronounce this. If I get it wrong, please correct me, okay? The way I think it's pronounced is Ngom. Am I close? Ngom?
Almost there. The N is almost silent, like you're saying chewing gum. Adding
Okay.
gum. Ngom.
Okay. Ngom. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you for correcting me. I need to learn how to pronounce names better. But thank you for being here. Let's get into.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into just your bio. You're a solutions designer, UI architect, and tech lead at Tech Labs 28 LLC. I love this that you told us your first interaction with a computer was playing Pac-Man, and you were more interested in knowing how it was built than how much fun it was to play.
Yeah,
that's awesome. For the past 20 years, Adi has strived in building simple, engaging, and very intuitive consumer-facing products. And as a JavaScript tech lead and UI architect, he spends the bulk of his time producing intuitive systems that are easy to scale and maintain. When away from the keyboard, he enjoys the Georgia outdoors with his wife and 2 daughters. To him, the unpredictable weather is a known issue that simply adds to the overall charm, and he would not have it otherwise. That's amazing. As a father of 2 daughters, I felt that. Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah, I love it. So your icebreaker question, just before we jump into your talk, is which is one of your favorite summer activities and why?
Summer activities. Since now I do have like a good insect repellent that doesn't have DEET in it, I do a lot of biking and walking again. And I was able finally to get back to my old running days, so nice. nothing like John Papa's level of running, but I'm getting there. I'm building up. I run 15 minutes without stopping, and I was usually out of breath at 45 seconds for the last 2 years.
Oh wow!
So I'm building up that resistance again. And yeah, I even have the iPod, like old school, the one that has 160 gigabyte to just load all my playlists in there and just go out there and run and bike. That's it.
That's amazing. Sounds great. Thank you for sharing. And I'm going to turn the time over to you. We're excited to hear your talk.
All right. So unfortunately, you're going to have to see me on profile because my screen is here for some reason. But yeah. I'm not disrespecting any of you guys. Sorry about that. So today, let me see. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when you can see it. Okay, Jason, can you see?
I can see your browser.
Okay, great. All right. So this is we're going to be talking about learning and understanding Angular. So after a while, you kind of want to start going into it and like trying to understand this beautiful thing that is Angular. That got us all like gathered here today. So this is just a string, but in behind the scenes, what we have here is basically an observable that is like has a filter and is only going to fire or is only going to go into the transform when we have an account status. Okay, so I have a setup here that is going to put like, the account type, the account service, the account number, and finally the account status. So this would be a setup that maybe you would do in a testing environment, but just to get to the point. The thing though, is this whole thing has like the async pipe involved here that is updating that string that we saw in the browser. But the async pipe has a lot of promises for us. It says that we don't need to subscribe. It will subscribe for us. We don't need to unsubscribe. It will do that for us too. Even if we change with any switch map or anything like that to a new observable, it will unsubscribe and subscribe to the new observable. So there's a lot of things that the async pipe is magically packing for us, So of course, when you come in and you have a lot of source code, example code, you just do it and you follow blindly. You just pretty much going through the motion. But if you want to go into the understanding mode, you are like, okay, how does it do all of that? Can I look under the covers? And you're like, well, that would involve me looking at this Angular source code, or how do I do that? So why not? It's JavaScript at the end of the day, at least in the compiled form. And even though the TypeScript can be a little scary, but the compiled form is JavaScript. Okay, so how do we find out a little more about the async pipe and all of these things it says that it has for us? Okay, so here, I'm just going to go to our dev tools in the inspect element, and I'm going to go to our source tab. Okay, and in our source tab, in the page, we have everything that is involved in this page, and I'm going to go to the vendor. And I'm going to say, okay, there is something called probably, and I think the previous presenter was saying everything is classes and functions at the end of the day. So how about if we try to find out about the async pipe? So let's do class. And I think this thing is on the way, I think. So I'm not sure how to hide this. If you guys have any ways, yeah. Hide loading meeting control. Okay, thank you, Zoom, for making it very complicated. So let's do class async pipe. We are in vendor.js that has all of our compiled code. We have our styles and everything, and we want to find out more about the async pipe class. Okay. And of course, the typo in there is not gonna. So class async pipe. And then here we see that all of the things that you're going to read in a normal, blog post or anything is going to be right there for you. The async pipe, what it does and everything, you have it right there. This is the compiled version, the JavaScript version of the async pipe, So this is great. And then you come in here, and like I said, it's just JavaScript. You have a constructor with a ref, which is probably the component, what it does, and all those of this little thing. And then the cool part, the subscribe block, you have the select strategy, which is something else we will talk about if we have the time, the dispose and so forth and so on. But now, how does it affect me? How does it actually affect my code or anything like that? Here, for people who are curious, the async pipe marks the component for check. And that's how, when you subscribe, you have that. You don't have to do change detection ref and everything like that. But this is where it does it. But can I question this real quick? I can put a breakpoint. This is actual Angular code. And the moment that I put the breakpoint, it went out from vendor and went to common MGS and shows me the actual path of where this exists in the node modules. Wow, this is great. Now, I want to put a breakpoint here, but I'm going to put a conditional breakpoint. And I'm going to just say, okay, if it is not false for my that latest value, because in my observable, I just want it when we have a certain value in there. So I'm going to put this as my conditional breakpoint. And I'm going to refresh this. It went pretty fast. So is it running in here? Oh, okay. Actually, let me edit the breakpoint, and I want to say not false instead of false. Let's see latest value. Let's enter that and let's refresh. Okay, there you go. So now this pose in the debugger, and you can see here, I can see that my setup, that what I was expecting for my object to have, the account number, the account services, everything is in here, and now I'm putting a breakpoint inside the source Angular code. I mean, that's just amazing. And we can do way more than that. That's just like to give you a quick example for this particular use case, So that's one of the things that I wanted to show. The other thing is, if you want to learn about Angular, be familiar with the Angular source code. So if you go to Angular, what I like to do sometimes when I just I'm doing my, having my coffee in the morning is just to go and look at the pull requests in the Angular repo and look at the ones that are closed. Why am I doing this? There was something about the standalone pipes that were going to happen. So here I put a few filters, is PR. The feature is in the common module, and then the ones that are closed. And when I run this, I have 135 of them. And then here I see make the common module directive standalone. So when I open here, this is actually looking into how the actual Angular team is going about building their code, but most importantly, how they talk about it. What is the thread in there? I mean, this is better than Twitter. That's the only thing that is better than Twitter, because now you can go in there, look at how these things are put together. And then you're going to find out new things in there that you have never seen before. But then when it's time for you to build your own pipe, you have the perfect example of how to build a pipe. And then when you go to how did they go about the testing, you're going to have the tests that are going to be in there that will show you. So basically, the biggest change here is to change the standalone true. But if you go to the testing side, and you go to the ng class spec. So if I was to do it for my own pipes, now I see how the Angular team is implementing their testing, basically. And right there, now I can just copy and paste and then keep on exploring until I have understanding. Okay. The final thing I wanted to show you is AI is here. AI, not as in Allen Iverson, but as in artificial intelligence. And we can use it to help us understand code. So this is the Angular project. I'm in the packages section. I'm in the common module, and I'm going to the async pipe. I have one of the extension called Denigma, and we can share that a little later. And here I can just right-click and say, explain the entire file to me. And then the Denigma AI is going to be thinking. Give it a second. And then it's going to explain you what the async pipe is. So if you kind of want to follow along, you can open the actual async pipe. And then here, let us just put it side by side and say on the view here in VS Code, I will say editor layout and then split right. Okay, now I have this and I have my async pipe. And I have my code explanation. Basically, so it's telling me, so I think I'm on the spec file, but it's telling me here, line by line or block by block, what is this thing trying to do? So now, if I want it to be just a little more precise, I could go into the actual, and I think I'm just about to run out of time, but we have about 30 seconds. So I can go to not my test, but the actual file here in my source, and I can go into my pipe. And then if I go to my async pipe, I can just take, for example, I want to understand a little more what this select strategy is doing. So I can select this whole thing, right click, and just say, explain Denigma. So Denigma now is going to come and tell me something like, the code is trying to create a new subscription strategy. And then that's how I got to find out about the strategy design pattern that is part of the Gang of Four design pattern. So I was like, what do they mean by strategy? Finally, strategy makes sense. And if you go to that reference, the design patterns, you'll see what it is about, which basically check, what solution to use at runtime. But the cool part here that we're not talking about design pattern is that we can just highlight some code, use this extension, for example, and then find out a little more about it. So I think I'm at time, so I'll keep it up there. But what I wanted to finish with is that explore, ask questions, dig a little more. And at the end of the day, it might be scary TypeScript, but it compiles to just JavaScript. That's it for me.
Wow. Way to go. There was some amazing advice in there. The chat was mind-blowing. That was amazing. Thank you so much. It's easy to see why you will be speaking at NgConf next month.
Thank you so much.
It was such a good presentation. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to turn things over to Blake Lamb, who's going to introduce our next speaker. But I did want to mention that we do have 3 speakers from NgConf here today. We have Marko, we have Adi, and we also have Preston. So thank you guys for showing up and taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
All right. Our next speaker is going to be Kamil Chlebek.
Chlebek, yes.
Okay. All right. I was hoping I was right there. Kamil will be speaking
Almost
to us
there.
about how to lazily load standalone components and configure it by using Injector. Kamil is a pragmatic software developer who knows when code is good enough and enjoys helping companies meet their business goals by using the Angular framework. Kamil started with AngularJS and switched to V2 in 2017, and since then tries to take advantage of the latest framework features. Kamil is currently living in Poland, but works remotely as the lead software developer on Keldoc at NgRx Digital, located in France. So Kamil, before we get started, we want to ask you one icebreaker question. What band or musician would you be embarrassed to say that you enjoy listening to?
Well, actually, I think I'm not listening to it anymore, but I did. I would say all of my friends are aware of it. It's a band called Accent to be precise, in Polish, and it's led by musician Zenon Martyniuk, and they play like disco polo, and somehow it helped me to focus when I was studying for my exams at the university. And yeah, it was very popular in 90s in Poland. And there's a fun fact, like I would say, like people will not many people would admit they know it, but whenever this their song starts at the Polish wedding reception, everybody starts singing it, and they already know the lyrics. So yeah,
that's awesome. Okay, well, thank you for being here, and we're excited to listen to your talk.
Thank you for having me. Okay, I will try to share my screen, and let's just put it into full screen. Yep, okay, I think you can see it. So today I'm gonna talk how to lazy load the standalone component and how can you configure it by using Injector. But first, let's start with a brief explanation. What is the lazy loading and why is it important for those who are not yet familiar with this term? So the lazy loading is a concept of loading components or bigger chunks of code only when they are needed. Because over time, our applications are becoming more complex, which increases their bundle size. And at some point, it's important to divide applications into parts and then load and execute them when they are needed. And thanks to that, initial bundle size that browser has to download and execute will decrease, which then in turn will result in better user experience. And for example, when you have like the e-commerce application, user using search doesn't have to load all the code required to place an order. And bundle size is important, but a single part of overall application performance. And to know more and to see how can it impact the business revenues, please have a look at the Why Speed Matters blog post on web.dev. But moving on, how can you do it in Angular? So the first way is to use load children option, which is available to you while defining the root configuration for a given module. In the past, it was like the only way to load part of the application on demand. And to use it, you have to assign to a load children property a function that will load and then return a module. But the main limitation of this approach is that it's used to load whole feature modules during activation of a specific root path. And despite this limitation at CalDoc, we managed to use the load children along with the named router outlets to implement lazy loaded models. Luckily, starting from Angular 9, thanks to Ivy Renderer, you can now load single components lazily. For example, when user clicks a button. And to do that, you have to first define a container in your component template. And then you have to grab a reference to that container using viewChild. And then you will define a method that will load and append new component to the view. And such function will use the import function to load component asynchronously. And afterwards, you pass this component to create component method exposed by view container wrap. By default, this component will be appended as last entry in the container, but you can also explicitly specify the desired position by using index option. At the time, when your component was using any other module, it was quite cumbersome to make it happen in Angular 9. But luckily, there was a workaround for that. And in that component file, you had to also create additional module that would declare component and import any other required modules. But with a release of standalone components, this is no longer an issue. You don't need any workaround or boilerplate code. Right now, all it takes, you have to just add standalone true property inside the component decorator, and then import any other required modules. The rest of the code stays the same. But let's assume that your component takes configuration by using a dependency injection. And how can you provide that configuration? Well, there are multiple options. First, you could use the root injector, which is a global scope injector available across a whole application. Another way is to use model injector, but that would mean creating a wrapper model just for that component. And in that case, we're trying to avoid that. And you could also use the element injector, but then the providers defined there would be kind of hard-coded, and they would be all the same for each of the component instances. And for our example, we want more dynamic approach. And there is another way to achieve that. You can create and pass your own injector, and here's how you can do it. So first, you have to create injector using the static method create, which takes a list of providers as an argument. Then you pass such created injector to create component method. But it's worth mentioning that this injector is detached from the dependency injection tree because we didn't provide a parent injector. But in this particular example, the injector will be attached to the tree thanks to the view container ref that will do it during the component creation. And as a result, our component will be able to inject any other tokens from the tree, not just these ones that we pass to the create method. But then in such an asynchronous environment, you want to make sure that your code won't be executed twice. It may happen that due to multiple clicks on the button and network delays, that our function creating a component may be executed twice or even more. And to prevent that from happening, here's the example, how can you deal with this issue? So you can create a lock decorator that will make sure you won't execute function again until the previous execution and the promise has resolved. And optionally, of course, you could extract the dynamic component creation to a service that will do a similar check. And code examples shown during this presentation are also available on my GitHub. So feel free to clone it and check how it works in practice. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kamil. That was great.
Thank you.
Lazy loading is something that I've learned a lot about, but definitely have a lot more to learn. And that was some good stuff. So we appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
All right. Our next speaker is Nicolas Valdivia. Nicolas will be giving us a talk about design principles in Angular. Nicolas is a front-end developer with 3 years of experience working on web-based projects with a good understanding of the main processes to build and design applications. He loves to collaborate with team members and is always up to keep learning. So Nicolas, before we get started, what is the strangest thing that you have in your refrigerator right now?
Oh, I don't know. That's a very great question, but I guess probably butter of apple, maybe. Okay. But they're almost traditional food.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good answer. So, okay. Time is over to you, and we look forward to hearing what you have to tell us.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Sorry, yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about design principles. This talk is going to be a little bit oriented to Angular, of course, but before I start, we have to know that design principles are not particular to any language or to any specific framework or technology. Design principles are there to be applied to any technology, to any language, so they are regardless the technology you are using. And that today's talk objective is how to face the idea of learning and understanding what are design principles. So it is going to be a little bit more focused to junior developers also. So let's start by the first topic, and it is what are design principles. So design principles are abstract recommendations about how to design your code. Okay, I like to say it twice because it's quite important to understand it. They are abstract recommendations about how to design your code. They are not strict rules to follow. They are not strict implementations you have to follow and implement in your code. Design principles are not that. Design principles are there so as to have a better code implementation that will allow your applications to be more maintainable, more scalable, and more flexible, right? When I started studying design principles, maybe some of you wonder the same question, that is, what does it mean by abstract recommendations? Well, we say abstract recommendations because these recommendations can be applied on very different ways. It is similar when you are working on a feature, on a solution. That problem can have different solutions. Maybe some solutions are better than others. So it's the same concept for design principles. Design principles can be applied on different ways depending on the framework, the technology, the language. So design principles are not telling you how to do it, but what to do. That's the key I had to understand before going on into deeper details, right? So design principles are not telling you how to do it, but what to do. So that's the key I wanted to share with you because it's kind of helpful, right? So the next topic I wanted to talk about is, as a junior developer, is it important to learn about design principles, or is it important to learn them before starting? Sorry, is it important to know about design principles before applying to a job or before building a project? So in the Angular community is widely suggested to apply solid principles and another principle like don't repeat yourself, for example. But is it really important before building a project or before applying to a job? So the answer for this, from my opinion, is yes. As a junior developer, you should know about design principles, but you don't have to be a master at it, because to be honest, it will be very complex to know how to apply them properly at the beginning of your career. So it is better to take action. It is better to start building something first, to apply to a job, to get the job you were looking for, but also be aware of what are design principles and which ones you can use in Angular. So take a moment to study about design principles, but don't worry too much about going deeper into details at the beginning of your career. However, design principles will impact significantly in your seniority level and also make a huge difference in your code quality. So my recommendation about how to study design principles is take it easy, because learning design principles and recognizing where and when to apply them is kind of complex. So you'll master it just by practicing a lot, doing a lot of code, learning from others, and be a constant learner. So the experience of working with different teams, with different projects on different scenarios will allow you to understand better what are design principles and how to improve your code quality. So we cannot have design principles talks without talking about solid principles. So we are going to talk about what solid says, and we are going to start by the first principle of solid, that is single responsibility. So single responsibility says that a class should have one and only one reason to change. The intention of this principle is to have items that are easy to understand their purpose. They explain themselves easily and it's easy to change, right? So that is what single responsibilities mean. The next one is the open close principle. It says your logic should be open to extension but close to modification. But I also like to say make it easy for modification too, because when you are extending the logic of an existing feature, you're most likely modifying some places, so it is not as easy as just adding code and everything is working, right? So I like to say make it easy for modification too. The next principle is the least scope substitution principle. So it says all parent classes instances should be replaceable by their child classes instances. This principle talks about inheritance, and this technique mustn't break the application. It is mainly used when defining diagrams because it helps us to model good inheritance hierarchies. The next one is interface segregation principle, and it says a class shouldn't be exposed to properties or methods it doesn't need. The objective of this principle is to reduce the side effects of using larger interfaces by breaking them into smaller ones. And the last one is dependency inversion, and it says modules shouldn't depend on concrete implementations of high or level load modules. So both kinds of modules, low or high level modules, should depend on abstractions. We can use injection tokens, directives, or services to accomplish that. So that's it. Thank you so much. You can reach me out by my LinkedIn profile. I'd be glad to receive some feedback and talk about Angular, of course. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicolas. That was great. All right. So our next speaker now, I hope I say this right, Yaakov Chaikin.
Close enough. Chaikin, Steve, silent.
Okay, Yaakov Chaikin. All right, so Yaakov is going to talk to us today about replacing ngDeep for good. Yaakov Chaikin is a full stack developer and software architect with over 20 years of professional experience as both a developer and a team lead. He is a part-time faculty member at the master's program of Johns Hopkins University, Whiting School of Engineering, where he has taught web development for the past 18 years. For the past 6 years, Yaakov's web development courses on Coursera.org have surpassed 800,000 students. He is also an open source developer. His latest project is Mongo Unit, which is a data-driven integration testing framework for Java Spring Boot-based applications that use MongoDB for persistence. The framework enables the developer to test the data access logic with relative ease. That's quite the career so far. That's pretty incredible. So we have one quick icebreaker question for you. You teach as a professor at a university. From your experience as an educator, what advice can you give to developers as they set out to learn new skills and tech that you feel a lot of people don't know and or need to know about learning? And obviously that's a pretty big question. So if you have just
so you want me to give you a quick talk on that before I
yeah, if you have a couple quick pointers.
Yeah, I would say the number one thing that I see all the time, and it's funny how that happens, I think, from the newbies to advanced people, and frankly, it's happened to me as well, which is the ability to ask a good question. You know, they say there's no such thing as a stupid question. That maybe is true, but there is such thing as a question that begs other questions. So, the proverbial, my code doesn't work. How do I fix it? Type of question, where you're inviting other people to say, well, can I see your code? What doesn't work? What's the error message? There's so much that, people kind of have especially if you get scared by some error message or something, you pull back and start basically asking questions that make the potential answer of your question work so hard just to understand what it is that you're asking. And in our world where a lot of questions on Stack Overflow or online, you really are doing yourself a disservice. And I've done this myself because it's just a human condition. You're really doing yourself a disservice when you don't provide as much pertinent information about your question as possible, because you're basically having, if you put yourself in the shoes of the person who potentially might answer that, they're scrolling and seeing a question, and their mind is, hey, so I got to now ask you another 5 different questions just to understand what you're asking, and then I can maybe see if I can help you. You're putting so much such a giant mountain between yourself and the actual answer that you're seeking. You're making them work so hard that a lot of times you just have these questions that are unanswered because, who wants to put in so much work just to ask you, what in the world are you even talking about? Right. So the number one thing I would say for everybody is, calm down. If it's a question that you just lost about, and think about how you could provide the most pertinent information to, the world out there that actually would be invited and it'll be easy for them to answer if they know the answer, as opposed to making it pretty hard for them to answer. So that'd be my
perfect
advice.
That's great. I agree. Asking good questions is always important. So, all right. Well, we'll turn the time over to Yaakov for his presentation.
All right. So what I want to talk to you about is basically replacing the pseudo class ngDeep for good. And for good, I mean, at least for now, within your own code. And somebody on my team actually figured out this. I don't want to say it's a trick. It's because it's a very standard thing. Should be, at least nowadays. And we kind of started using it on our project throughout. And I think it's been just great. So, but before we jump to that, Angular is a component-based architecture framework. And I think it's important to understand the background a little bit. What is a component? Component, essentially, at least certainly for this context, is just a black box. I don't know how it's implemented, and really, I shouldn't have to know how it's implemented. I just want to be able to use something. No different than I would use an API. In fact, component API is our outputs and our inputs, right? We customize the component that way. Now, part of Angular, something that I actually absolutely love about Angular, which is view encapsulation. So that's really part of that black box idea. An idea behind view encapsulation is that the styles of one component don't bleed out to the rest of the application, don't bleed out to other components. And that's really handy. I think Angular was very good to include that, not because it's just conceptually a good idea, but also it just provides such a much easier developer experience when you code. You don't have to remember that, oh, I named this class here this way, but I named this class maybe possibly the same in a different component. All that kind of solves the view encapsulation solves that for you. So the point of view encapsulation is that, again, it doesn't bleed the styles of the component out to the entire application. And let me show you a quick example of what that means. So for example, we have two components, component A, component B. They're pretty much the same. And we're going to turn on the view encapsulation of emulated, which is just emulating the shadow DOM for our components. And it's a little bit outside of the scope to explain what that is. But the bottom line is components kind of live, at least in an emulated view here, they kind of live in their own little HTML bubbles, and they don't bleed out their styles outside. So you could see I defined one style in one component, which is the hello class, and it's color blue, and the other one, it's the exact same hello class, and it's color green. So what view encapsulation allows me to do is that I'm able to put both of those components in the same template of the same application, and I have one hello Angular in blue and the other one hello Angular in green, meaning they don't step on each other. I don't have to worry about the fact that they're named the same. Angular provides and fixes that for me. It kind of makes the component live in its own bubble. Now, the question, however, is, well, what if I need to customize that component styles? Because a lot of times you kind of do need to, and in practice, you do need a lot of times to customize them. So if you look at Angular docs, here's what it says about customizing components. It says you should consider the styles of a component to be private implementation details for that component, which is kind of what I've been kind of saying. And then it adds, when consuming a common component, you should not override the component styles anymore. You should access the private members of a TypeScript class, which is an interesting statement. And I think whoever wrote this was very smart to put it this way, because what does that mean? Does that mean I should never, ever override styles at all in it? I should never even customize them? I don't think it means that. I think it kind of means that just like private member variables of a class, you don't directly override them, but you could still customize the behavior of a component. In this case, customize the styles. So Angular has one solution to do that. The one solution is ngDeep. That's the pseudo class that it provides. So what does it do? So from the docs again, it says applying ngDeep pseudo class to any CSS rule completely disables view encapsulation for that rule. And how does that do that? Again, from the docs, any style with ngDeep applied becomes a global style. So basically, think of it as a nut, and we just drill a little hole in the nut, and we pull out that previously very private style, and we just basically make it completely global. So just to show what that means, so here we have a component. It's a hello component, and you can see in the styles here, it's basically the same code. We defined that hello with the color blue. So now what we'd like to do is we'd like to use the default, the blue, which is the top hello component usage in our app component HTML. And below we have yet again the same component, but we would like to now make the Angular green. That Angular part is green. So the way we do that is we use ngDeep. So we specify host, we'll explain in a second why, specify the class green, and you see the ngDeep, and we kind of reach our hand inside of the component and override the div.hello to be green. And here's the reference to that hello component code, its template, and that's how basically it connects. And then we also specify host, and this is something that actually Angular docs talk about, is because since we know that ngDeep bleeds the component to the global scope, we kind of want to try to kind of wrangle it back in and not have it bleed all over the place, but maybe just to this particular host, which in this case the app.component itself, but we want to try to restrict it just to that scope alone. And sure enough, if we do that, everything works perfectly, and we are able to customize it. Now, so this is our solution, right? We specify host, possibly a class, say ngDeep, and we kind of reach into the component. So the question is, why is this bad? Well, for a few reasons. Number one, it only works with emulated, not real shadow DOM. So if you ever to, progress the real shadow DOM 100%, this would not work. You also must remember to at least include host. Otherwise, style change will just bleed all over your app. And instead of just changing the color green in one spot, you just all of a sudden change that reusable component in every spot of your app. So that's not something we want. So we have to remember to do that. We also have to fight with possibly complex CSS specificity. Remember, div.hello is a pretty simple example, but regular components, they have kind of, a nice structure to them a lot of times. And that structure follows class structure with the CSS classes, and you'll have to override that. Otherwise, you're kind of reaching into the component isn't going to be good enough. And finally, the most horrible part of it all is that it breaks the whole API paradigm. Now you actually must know specific implementation of a component. A lot of times when you do ngDeep, you kind of basically crack open your HTML page and see what exactly is the implementation of this component, what's the HTML like, and now you start doing all kinds of basically trickery to get it to wrangle its arm to actually look the way you want. So what's the alternative? So one alternative is CSS variables. So why is that a good alternative? Well, number one is it's actually designed to pierce the shadow DOM. It's a standard, so it's not just a hack how to pierce the shadow DOM. It's actually a standard, and it's very declarative. You declare these variables, and it's very API-like, feels like API-like approach. It also works just like any other CSS. It cascades, so it goes down the DOM tree just like CSS should. And it doesn't depend on selector specificity. So you don't have to fight with selectors and try to overwrite something somewhere. You simply declare. So let's look at a same component, but now re-implement it using this approach. So it's the same component. And this time, just for the demo purposes of it, we'll just set the encapsulation to shadow DOM. So we'll actually produce the real shadow DOM code. And in this case, what we're doing is we're using this variable or the CSS property, same terminology, CSS variable hello color. And hello color is not declared anywhere here. We're just using it. And just in case nobody declares it anywhere, we are going to go ahead and give it a default value. So if hello color is not declared, it's going to just default to blue. So now the only thing left to do is actually tell the developers that are consuming our components that we have such a thing called hello color variable. So we publish hello color as part of our component docs. So say, hey, if you want to change the color, here's the all you do is declare this color variable, and you're good to go. You could actually change the color inside. Okay, so now in our app component, we'll do exactly the same thing. We have the first one, kind of the default. And the second one, we're going to give it the class green version tip. Okay, and this is our app component.css. There is no trying to figure out what implementation of the hello component looks like. We just declare hello color to be green, and we're done. It just magically basically pierces the, not magically, by standards, it pierces the shadow DOM and is able to override that var that we had before, and hello Angular is now in green. So you can see I'm not fighting here with any CSS specificities. I don't need to know whether or not tomorrow perhaps the author of the component is going to want to change the div that hello to paragraph tag. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just declaring and saying the hello color that you've published as your CSS API, I want to be able to provide green as its declarative property. Okay, so in summary, component is like a black box. You shouldn't really need to care about its inner code. And component styles are best treated like private member variables. And ngDeep, while it can be used, it's got a lot of shortcomings. It breaks the black box paradigm, needs to be restrained. There's the CSS specificity issue. On the other hand, CSS variables provide a very clean and declarative standards-based way, and you could customize your components that way in much cleaner, a kind of versatile fashion. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. And if you wanted to follow me on social media, here are my links. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Yaakov. That's a great way to do that. I've had to fight with NgDeep before and trying to style components, and it's always kind of a pain. We have one quick question. What do you think the benefits of using CSS variables are over providing inputs to the component
right.
Input of classes, for example?
Right. So I think it's a great question, because when I was wrestling around with NgDeep, especially NgDeep on Angular, it's a little confusing because Angular specifically in their docs states NgDeep is deprecated, yet everybody uses it. So when you're like, oh, if it's deprecated, I shouldn't be using it. Well, no, that's pretty much kind of everybody does that. So the input, the inputs as that API is the natural kind of next thought is to why don't I just provide it as an input? The problem with inputs is that it's really not. It's like, when you write HTML in some JavaScript editor, when you write JavaScript in an HTML editor, things just don't kind of click. It's not the same. It's not the same language. It's not the same fit. So while you could do that, CSS is not something that's passed dynamically in the browser. It is something that has its own kind of paradigm and its own language and its own rules, cascading and so on and so forth. So if you pass it through inputs, while you could do that, it's going to become very awkward very quickly, because now you have to, append px for pixels or rem for rems for certain values. You just can't have that same paradigm of DOM structure where it's going to start inheriting things. I'm only going to declare it here. Things are no longer CSS-y, so to speak, right? They're now become very, you're now living in the JavaScript, the TypeScript world. You're not using the API of CSS. And that's probably the biggest problem with that. And you're going to end up just writing a whole bunch of code just to kind of get your JavaScript values back, kind of stuff it back in the CSS way of expressing them. And it's just going to be awkward. That's really the main reason, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think you could provide a class input for every single customization possible, or you have one class list input and they put it in there, but it can get. I've done that, and it is a little bit tough. And like you said, it still feels kind of hacky to me, like you were talking about at the beginning of your talk, where especially if you have control over this, if you can put in CSS variables, and then all they have to do is change the variable, that is a lot simpler, I think. So.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that something like material components will switch to that soon. I think what was holding them back is they were trying to support older browsers that weren't really supporting this yet. But I think they pretty much, from what I understand, pretty much dropped support for anything that doesn't support CSS properties, CSS variables. So I'm hoping it's going to come in the future, because I think that comes up very often with material components, where you just want to tweak something a little bit right here, and you end up kind of being pushed into NgDeep, which is not as convenient.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, thank you so much. We'll go ahead and move on. While our next speaker is kind of setting up, I'll go ahead and introduce him. His name is John Warrington. John is going to talk about RxJS and Lego art. John Warrington got started writing code at a summer camp when he was 12 and has been coding ever since. He has used many different languages over the years, working mostly for custom software consulting companies. He is currently working as a full stack developer at Clark Builders, building internal tools to improve the efficiency of the people building the buildings, as well as building solutions to move data between different purchased solutions to improve the ability to report on it. So welcome, John. We're excited to have you here. We're excited to hear. I've been looking forward to hearing what how we can combine RxJS and Lego art. So before we get started, we have one quick icebreaker question for you. What is something that's expensive, but you still think is worth the cost?
Well, the mind first goes to Lego. It is very expensive, especially when you start building larger things. But it's, enjoyable to build. It's enjoyable to watch the reactions of people seeing displays that you put on. So it's fun.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't do a lot of Lego myself, but I have a 10-year-old daughter who loves to do Lego sets, and she asked for them for Christmas and her birthday, and they are a little bit pricey, but she loves doing them, and she has a lot of fun. So I agree with that. I like that answer. So, all right. Well, I'm excited to hear what you have for us. We'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Okay. So based on the previous talks, this is going to be slightly less educational, but yeah, I'm going to talk about some RxJS with Lego art. But if I'm going to talk about Lego, first thing, the plural of Lego is never Legos. Even the Lego group says so. Generally, the adult fans agree that Lego is fine, but Lego actually wants you to say Lego bricks, Lego sets, etc. So Lego art could mean sculptures, mosaics, just about anything. These are actually all things I have built. The Batman and the Minnie Mouse are actually official sets. The rest is custom stuff. And well, I'm going to mostly talk about Lego mosaics today because they're fairly simple. And then what is RxJS? I still have difficulty explaining this one. The official definition, RxJS is a library for reactive programming using observables to make it easy to compose asynchronous or callback-based code. So basically, it's a way to react to events, flow data through a set of operators that can then transform data without having to set up a bunch of callback functions. To generate a mosaic, you will start with a source image. You will crop it. You will resize to your target dimensions, aiming for 1 pixel per 1 stud, because that's kind of how it works. And then you will replace with the available Lego colors, or the colors that you have. There will be, in gray here, those are the actual events that would be triggered as they choose different, as somebody chooses different sizes, different colors, changes the cropping. So then, if I flip over to here. So I've just built a simple little app here and set up some observables. I'm using a component that allows you to choose your cropping. I've got a way of choosing different sizes, how many studs by how many studs, choosing which colors you have. And now as I uncomment stuff, because that's the easiest way to do this, I'm, responding to the event of the cropping and resizing and outputting a little image. If I change it to a different size, you get a bigger image down there. Different dimensions, etc. So then, again, the next step being, so this is using, combine the latest to combine your dimensions you've chosen here with the output of this image cropper component, and then feeds it through a custom operator I built called resize image, which takes both of those and outputs a new image string. Then to do I've done basically the same thing. I take that resized image observable, our selected colors based on this pop out, pipe it through a replace colors thing, which then outputs in this case, because of how I'm going to do the final image, two different things. An image string that will actually display it with the translated colors. And if I was to say I don't actually have any red, it gives you some funky colors because that is your different, the closest matching. And then based on a talk, I think at this meetup a while ago, someone was doing custom SVGs, and I decided to try doing that to output what your actual display would look like. So now if I was to change shape, move things around, and you get all sorts of other fun little things. I have brown, reddish brown, gives you slightly better colors. But again, it's mostly just piping your data through all the different filters, operators, and pulling out the bits you need at the end. The code is actually there on GitHub. And if you want to reach out to me, John Warrington on Twitter.
Perfect. That was really cool. I like that. That was fun. So I'm definitely gonna have to go poke around the code, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn the time over to Chris, who will introduce our next speaker.
All right. Next up, we have Bhati. Minnie, I forgot to mention at the beginning of our talk, but you are one of our newest co-organizers at the meetup. You've done a great job maintaining the meetup.com and helping us out. And you also talked a couple months ago for the first time. You did a lightning talk. Did a fantastic job. So you've set the bar high for yourself, right? So Minnie is a UI enthusiast currently working as a software engineer at Cisco. She loves Angular. Her interests lie in making the user experience memorable. In the past, she's been doing various engineering and support roles delivering Angular applications in the finance and education domain. So Minnie, your icebreaker question for today is, if you could only keep 3 apps, which would you choose and why?
Okay, then this is, I think the first one would be Twitter and WhatsApp. Now the third one is a bit tricky. I think I would keep Slack or Instagram, maybe one of them.
Good choices. Yeah, you got to keep the Bird app, right?
Yeah.
Protect Twitter. All right, so you're going to be talking about standalone PDC today. Looking forward to hearing your talk. Take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about standalone PDC. So in the next 10 minutes, we'll understand what are the what, why, and how of standalone PDC. So let's start with the what. Standalone PDC is basically standalone pipes, directives, and components. It means pipes, directives, and components can be used independently of ng module. That means the standalone components, pipes, and directives can directly manage their own dependencies without the need of an ng module. It means basically to have a mental model change where we think of standalone components as having virtual ng module, which really exports that component, but it doesn't really exist. Why? I think this is more important to understand. Why do we need it? So as we know, component must belong to an ng module in order to be available for it in the entire application. So which means ng modules are basically the smallest reusable building blocks in Angular and not components. This was mentioned in the Angular RFC as well. That means component creation is not just the functionality and the template, it's much more than that. It means that you need to have an ng module with all the dependencies provided, and when a parent component, a child component imports the parent component, then it has to import the module as well. Same is the case with pipes and directives. They need a module to be able to use pipes and directives. You need them to be declared inside the ng module to be able to use them in the application. Now, as I was saying, since a component is no longer just a component, it's component plus ng module, which means Angular has to deal with some implicit dependencies when importing a child component from the parent component. Therefore, build performance is impacted. Also, some might reason is ng module really is a module, because we can violate the rules and perform deep imports to actually access the unexported things from the module. So basically, the one thing which we ask for encapsulation, we don't get from ng module. So I have two stack split links. Sorry for not opening them before. So here I have a hello component and I have a hi component which has a module dependency involved. And in order to import this into the hello component, I have to create a module file and import the reactive forms module, which is responsible for this little control over here, to be able to use inside the hello component. But the same thing which oops, just a second. How can we just yeah. The same thing which I see in the standalone component, it's just a hello component which has the flag as standalone true and imports. It has just it mentions the component as hi component, and that's all. I have the imports, my reactive form module, which was supposed to be in the hi component, and ultimately my hello component is ready to use. So now let's move on to the how. So how does a standalone component looks like? So PDC are marked as standalone true, which means they don't need to be declared in the ng module declarations array and are standalone, which means if you see the standalone true flag right here, this means this is a standalone component. It also specifies the dependencies in the imports array, which means if you see the imports here, it has a capital case pipe and a column directive specifying that this component is sufficient to import the dependencies of the pipes and directive and no longer need an ng module to import all of these. The second how do we create a standalone component? So these are the three commands. It's pretty much the same, like we generate a component, directive, and pipe. We just add the standalone flag to it. So it creates the standalone true flag for us in the metadata. The third how. Now, how do we use it? Standalone components can be directly bootstrapped in the Angular applications using the Bootstrap application API. That means you no longer have to have an ng module to load your application. You can straight away have a component and load it directly in the Angular application. Second thing, standalone components can import other standalone components. Like we saw earlier, if there's some other standalone component, we can directly import, mention that component into the imports array and has that available in our standalone component. Third thing, it can be lazy loaded. So it's very easy to lazy load a component, and we no longer need a module to be doing that for us. Fourth, it can be exported from the libraries. So for library authors, there are certain things you can either export the ng module itself, or you could export the standalone pipes, directives, and components. So we have that option available as well. Also, standalone components can import existing modules as well. So if we definitely have some existing modules in the application. So if we have some new standalone components, we can definitely import them in the components and continue using it the same way. And standalone components can be imported into existing ng modules. So our application, if we have some existing ng modules, we can create standalone components and then import them going forward to make our components just to deal with the components on themselves for the dependencies. Now the bonus question: what happens to the dependency injection? So we know we have only two types of injector hierarchies. One is the elementer and one is the module. The element hierarchy is responsible for managing the injectors at the element level, and the module, it takes on the null injector all the way up. So with the Ng modules out of the picture, there's a new term introduced, which is called environment injector. Environment injectors basically can be created in one of the following 4 ways. One is the same way we provide it at the root level. Second, if we have some dependencies at the component level, then we provide that in create that injector for that as well. Then we have, I think in the standalone components, there is a new way to provide services at the route level. So that is also a part of environment injector. So now what happens to the injectors? What happens to the standalone component? Because a standalone component might have their own dependencies. In that case, a new injector is created, which is called standalone injector, which manages all of its dependencies. And that is a child of the environment injector. So basically all the standalone components will have their own injectors, which will take care of the dependencies. And finally, we will have up the hierarchy, the environment injector, and then we go up the hierarchy and finally up to the null injector. So the best resource, I think, for knowing about standalone components is the RFC, is the original RFC. It's very elaborate, and I think it has great discussions going on over there. Thank you so much. I think I was able to make you as excited as I am about standalone components.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a great talk. Yeah, standalone components are pretty cool, and what Angular is doing to move us forward is pretty interesting. All right, are there any questions? Addy mentioned that this smells like tree shaking. I think that was at the beginning of your talk. Yeah, I guess, how does this affect tree shaking? Is that the question? All right.
Sorry, Chris, I couldn't get that. Could you please come again?
I think there was a question about how this affects tree shaking in Angular.
So basically, tree shaking is Angular takes care of it. As standalone components doesn't do anything extra, because during the build time, any unused things are going to be strapped out. So doesn't change, I think.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have Azizi Yazit. Did I say that correctly?
Hi, Chris.
Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well.
Cool.
So you are a Malaysian front-end architect. You work for Travicore Intelligence as a software architect. Azizi loves web technologies, component libraries, design systems, which is why you enjoy researching topics such as component patterns, models, and architecture. So today you're going to be talking about continuous integration with trunk-based and feature toggles. Sounds pretty interesting.
Yep.
So we do have a little icebreaker for you. What is the last show that you binge watched on a streaming service like Netflix or Hulu?
Actually, I didn't watch Netflix because in Malaysia we have a unified TV, which is free when you subscribe the internet, so that it has quite a lot of cool movies. So that I just enough with that. As long as those channels have a channel for my kids, that's enough.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Interesting. It's always interesting to learn about how different things work throughout the world. It's always different in different countries.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to hearing your talk. Take it away.
Let me full screen. So hopefully that everyone is able to see my screen in case that yeah, cool, right. Today we talk about the continuous integration with trunk-based and feature toggle. So that basically the continuous integration is the practice for us to integrate the codes or the words more frequently. In the common of the practice for the team that adapt the continuous integration is that, for example, if you have the 3 active developer, at least you will have 3 words to be integrated in one day. And then the configuration has the tools that will verify all the integrations through the automated build. and to ensure that everything is safe and avoiding all the breaking change. And while the Trunk-based development is pretty much the same, I will not repeating the same things, but the Trunk-based development is exactly in the context of the branching system or the branching strategy. So I bet that most of us have experience with the Git flow or the GitHub flow, and the Trunk-based is the same kind of the tools, which is the branching strategy. So the context of the Trunk-based is merging a PR and continuously, frequently, so that basically if you have 3 active developer, you might potentially at least to have a 3 PR to be merged, and potentially to have more than that. And the branch that been used in the Trunk-based development is called short-lived branches, which means that the maximum for the branch is 2 days, but the best practice is to keep it 1 day, 1 day only, so that people always think that committing to the trunk is dangerous. But if we have discipline, we have adapting the trunk-based development strategies that later on I will explain. Actually, directing committing to the trunk is not dangerous, but is the fast way to incrementally provide the value to your customer and the team. So trunk-based development is the key enabler of continuous integrations. In order for you to have using the trunk-based development correctly, you need to adapt the strategy of the trunk-based. They have the 3 strategies that I know is, one is the branch by abstractions, the second one is the feature toggles, and the third one is feeds forwards. On this talk, we will talk about explain about the branch by abstraction and the feature toggle. So we use the branch by abstraction to merge a complex or larger scale chains and divide into a small chunk of the batch, or small chunks or a division of the numbers of the branches. Imagine that we have the login page, so that we divide the login page components like the text fields components, typography, buttons, and the link into the set of abstractions. So this is the complete picture of the branch by abstraction in the diagram of the repository branch, so that we creating the component as abstractions. Imagine that we have the login page, the developer working with the login page, and another developer working with the register page, so that in order for us to have the ability for the concurrent development, so by having the reusable component as the abstraction will benefit both of the developer or both of the owner of the branch. So the branch is short-lived branches, and once you have created the component with the unit test, with the storybook and the component itself, then after it being reviewed and merged, then the branch will be deleted. So that the benefit that you have by having the branch by abstraction is that you are committing the small size of the codes. So this resulting on the intensive of the code review, because it not limit the cognitive load of the reviewer. So the reviewer will be able to see all in the big picture what the intention or the idea of the one who commit the codes, and it enable the concurrent development, the things that we has discussed in the previous slide. So now we talk about another strategies is the feature toggle. The feature toggle are powerful techniques. It allowing teams to modify system behavior without changing the code, which is we practically changed the features flags in the runtime. So imagine that we have the feature flags either in the JSON or in the database. We inject or initiate into using through the app initializer, and then update into the app states. And the feature flag directive will go through on the states and check on the value of the flags, and toggle the visibility of the component that will that has been read by the feature flag directive. right? So this is an example of the codes of the left side is the example of the feature flag. So it's just a simple Boolean value true false. And the right side, the black spot, is the example codes how to use the features flag directive. So for example, if we toggle up the feature A to true, then this will be shown to the one who view your app, right? So that the feature toggle consists of a lot of benefits. Imagine that you have incomplete words, but the timeline for you to provide the MVP, the next MVP, the next release is due, so that we can just wrapping the codes into the directive and turn it off and just committing the codes, and the code will be safe to be released to the customer. And then the code base is always releasable because we have the feature flag to toggle true or false. Always releasable on demand and making the continuous delivery reality. And then because of we having this feature flag, we'll be able to adapt in the practice to commit to the trunk at least one every 24 hours. Yeah, I think I'm missing one summary page. So in the summary is that continuous Trump-based developments complementing the continuous integration. The Trump-based development is the key enabler for the continuous integration. If you use the Trump-based development, indirectly you are adapting the continuous integrations. So hopefully that it initiate an interest for the listener to use the Trump-based and the feature toggle. That's all for me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really cool strategies and good ways to promote smaller commits, smaller pull requests that are a lot easier to review and test without, actually pushing code that, might not be complete for a user to see.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's really cool.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Next, I will hand it over to Alex, who's going to introduce the next couple speakers.
Thank you. So our next speaker is going to be Jonathan Garvey, and he's going to be talking to us about tools of the trade, better software through better dev tools. So Jonathan Garvey is a software engineering technical leader at Cisco. He's a passionate software engineer dedicated to building quality software and delivering products and experiences that people love to use. He loves to take a visual concept and turn it into quality code. And he's also a stickler for spelling, which he says is probably one of the reasons why he's so dedicated to quality software. Outside of programming, he enjoys playing music and getting into outdoors whenever he can, especially fishing. He's also a proud father of one rambunctious 2-year-old who he will definitely teach programming as soon as he possibly can. So before you go into your presentation, we do have one icebreaker question. It's, what is your favorite thing to do by yourself?
Oh man, probably think without any noise or distractions. I need absolute silence sometimes to be able to think clearly. I have a lot of noise in my head. So when I'm by myself, I like to think.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. So we're excited to hear from you for your presentation. We turn the time over to you for that.
All right. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. Today I'm going to be talking about tools of the trade, better software through better dev tooling. An alternate title I had considered was Don't Be a Tool, Use One, but I figured this would be more professional. So this is what we're talking about today. The goals today, we're not talking about fancy web bundlers or anything like that. We're talking about the dev tools that I use on a daily basis. And that's one of my goals, is to show you what tools I use, so that maybe you'll pick out one or two and be like, oh, I'll use that one instead. Or maybe that'll help me in my workflow. But I also want everyone to just analyze the way they write software, think about how they could optimize it, and see if there are any tools out there that can help them. So we're going to go in 3 categories here. We're going to have tools for local development, tools for source control, and tools for the runtime. I ran through this like 5 times and it was like just seconds under 10 minutes, so I'm gonna have to go fast. All right, we're gonna start with local development. The first tool I use quite often is the NX console. If any of you have used the Angular CLI or the Narwhal NX extension CLI, you know, it's awesome for generating code, but you got to do it from the command line. And thus you have to remember all those command line arguments. And if you're like me and you mess up one character, you now have to do a git revert because there's a misspelling in 17,000 files. So that's where the NX console VS Code plugin comes in. It allows you to generate libs and apps and all the goodies with these. And it also lets you run NX commands from the command palette in VS Code or from the sidebar. So I want to kind of show just a little taste of what NX console can do. This is basically just creating a lib. And instead of remembering all those pesky command line arguments, it literally just gives you form fields and you just fill them out. When you fill them out, it does a dry run. So you can double check what you've done, then you can click run. And that's that. This also works with your workspace generators, your custom ones for your monorepo, which is something I just relatively recently found out, and that made me very happy. It just integrates right with it. So that's awesome. This is great for beginners and seasoned professionals alike. This is the Angular Essentials extension pack from John Papa. It's got things like Angular snippets for generating code snippets, Angular language service for IntelliSense in your component development, editor config for automated formatting on your code, ESLint so you can endlessly argue with your team about best practice. Automate your best practices, material icon theme, and the winter is coming theme if you want to spice up your development, and a couple more tools there. Now this is a very small VS Code plugin, but I have come to love it. This is JSON2TS. And as the name implies, it allows you to take a JSON data structure and turn it into a TypeScript interface. And that's literally it. You copy the JSON, you paste the JSON, and it turns into a TypeScript interface. Not only that, but if you have a working REST API, you can take that REST endpoint, copy that, paste it in, it'll go fetch the data, bring back that JSON data, and turn it into a TypeScript interface. I cannot say it enough. This is an amazing tool. I used to do all my interfaces manually, and that's no fun. This next tool is called the Thunder Client, which probably wins the best name award in my list, although it's ironic that their logo is lightning. Anyway, this is basically like Postman in your VS Code. You can easily create API requests using a UI. You can organize your API requests in collections, import collections from your other REST clients that you've used, test your API calls with a UI with almost no scripting, and much, much more. As you can see here, if anyone's used a REST client before, it's very familiar. You've got your requests. You can create new requests with params and headers, and you get your response. Now we're gonna move on to the terminal. This is a framework I have come to love, and I don't think I could actually do development without it. It's amazing. So it's the OMI-ZSH framework, and it's built on top of the ZSH shell. So in addition, the first thing it gives you is amazing themes. No configuration, and your terminal will suddenly be the envy of every developer everywhere. On top of that, they've got hundreds of plugins. 2 of them that I use frequently are the Git plugin for kind of visualizing the state of your Git workspace, and the autocomplete, which basically turns your bash history into like an autocomplete, so you don't got to scroll through it. And then they've got tons of aliases for common Git commands. I cannot be bothered to type out my Git commands anymore. Speaking of manually typing, here we have Fig, and Fig to me is revolutionary. It's basically IntelliSense for your terminal. It turns your terminal into an IDE, giving you autocomplete just like VS Code would. It already integrates with many of the dev tools you already use, like other IDEs, other shells, things like that. Supports 300 plus CLI tools. So I use it a lot for NX. Like it'll just, when I'm not using NX console, I do have to use the terminal. It helps me with autocomplete for NX, also the AWS CLI. And then if something doesn't exist, you can send it with your own auto completion. And this is just a quick taste of what it can do, showing basically something simple first, like CDing into a path. Now using Git, it basically just auto completes everything for you. Even works with the actual arguments themselves. It's basically like having a man page, but as IntelliSense. So let's move on into source control. GitLens is a fantastic and very feature-rich VS Code plugin. I could never tell you everything that it does here in one slide, but I'll give you some highlights. So there's file and line blame, so you can figure out who broke production quicker. It's got a feature-rich sidebar, including views for commits, repos, branches, remotes, things like that. It's got a command palette that basically gives you access to every Git command in the book. And it's got an interactive rebase editor, which if you see it here on the right, I could have used this a long time ago when I was learning how to rebase. This would have been so handy. It almost feels like cheating. Now, if you've been a developer, an Angular developer, any amount of time, you know the Angular team has Git commit standards, Git commit message standards. Okay, you've probably seen something like this. You need a type, you need a scope, you need a description. Oh, and you need a long description. And you need breaking changes and a ticket number. All right, I'm a software developer. I'm not a Git commit developer. Fortunately, we have some tools that have our back. Two of them specifically: Conventional Commits VS Code plugin and the Comitizen terminal integration. The Conventional Commits VS Code plugin is super easy. It basically allows you to commit right from the command palette, turns that commit message creating process into an intuitive UI, and then even saves your commonly used scopes for reuse. So we can see over here on the right, basically create a commit from the command line, choose our type, create a scope, add a Gitmoji because we're cool like that, add a short description, add a long description, and the JIRA number, fictitious, of course. And boom, we've created a commit. And now we can go look in our commit history and see that beautiful commit message that we have generated effortlessly. Now, Comitizen does the exact same thing, except for the terminal. It's basically a CLI to guide you through the commit message creation process, uses conventional commit standards by default, and easily integrates with pre-commit hooks. So this is just an example. It's almost exactly like that conventional commits tool that I showed in VS Code. You pick your type, your scope, subject, breaking change, long body, footer, and you're off to the races. The final category of stuff is runtime, your runtime dev tools. Now, of course, I cannot do any talk without talking about the Angular dev tools, which basically gives you insight into how your components are behaving. You've got a component tree, but you've also got the state of your component and its inputs and outputs that you can actually tweak and see how your component responds. And you've also got a profiler where you can look at the performance of your Angular application. And last, but certainly not least, are the Redux dev tools. This is a very powerful suite of tools all bundled into a browser extension that allow you to observe the state of your Angular application. And via Redux, whether that's NgRx or some other framework for that. You can view the action log, navigate back and forth through the state history, dispatch custom actions, view your state as a pretty JSON structure or the raw JSON structure, and even view your current state as a chart. Pretty. So I could go on and on and on and on. I use so many tools on a daily basis, but I really wanted to discuss those with everyone. So in conclusion, you're only as good as your tools. Not really, but your tools really help you. The better tools you have, the better developer you can be. And that's my philosophy, which is why I wanted to give this talk to you all. Thank you for listening. Hope you all enjoy the rest of the talks.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan, that was awesome. There's seems to be a lot of great tools out there to help us. So we'll move on to our last speaker today, Alfredo Perez, and he'll be talking to us about making Atomic the NgRx entity. Alfredo is a staff UI engineer at SailPoint. He started his career doing Windows development and transitioned to web development using ASP.NET. Since then, he has enjoyed web UI development, from learning jQuery to discovering how mysterious data binding was in AngularJS, followed by Angular and its more elegant ways to handle components and the other 1,000 libraries he's found on the way. He's passionate about DevX and UI. He also likes to find ways to to make code reusable, readable, and enjoyable to help developers get from their first line of code to the launch of quality products. Lately, Alfredo has been getting into the rabbit hole of personal knowledge management systems and digital gardens. So we're excited to hear from you today, but we also have a icebreaker question for you, Alfredo, and it is, if you could instantly have any skill or talent, what would you choose and why?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Usually for this question, I answer something like I learn to play piano or learn to do 3D animation or something like that. But lately I have been playing StarCraft, and I wish I had the skills of the pro gamers. Like, it's just crazy, all the things that they do, and it's amazing.
Yeah, pro gamers, they are amazing, and that would be a really awesome skill to have. But yeah, so we'll turn the time over to you and let you go into your lightning talk.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so let's talk about how to make Atomic the NgRx entity. So let's break this apart. The first thing that we need to define is what is NgRx entity. So NgRx entity provides an API that to manipulate and query entity collections. So it's a way to reduce boilerplate for creating reducers that manage collections and also provide some selectors. So a quick refresher of how this works. We have first we need to define the state using the entity state model. And here in my example, you can see how I'm also defining a couple of custom properties like loading, loaded, and error message. The second step is that using this, we need to create an entity adapter. And using the entity adapter, we can create the initial state. And later on in the reducers, we can use this entity adapter to manipulate the collection. And in this case, you can see how I am adding a new friend to the collection. And at the same time, I'm also keeping track of the other properties that I was using. So now let's go to state machines. So this is a model that defines that a system can be only in one state at a time. So if we see here the state changes for a fetch request, we can see that these cannot be in multiple states at the same time, meaning that we cannot have the fetch request to be in success and failure at the same time, right? Like it transitions to one state to another. So if we apply this to NgRx, then we go to what is called atomic state, because it's a single state, single property to hold the state. So where before we used to have the friends state with loading, loaded, and error message, and any other kind of properties related to the state of the request, now we can create an interface for these states and the error, and we will have only a single property for this. And this property in this case is called request state. So whenever we use it in the reducer, instead of having to keep track of loaded and all these properties, now we just say the request state to the state that we wanted. Like in this case, we just added a friend, so we can set the request state to resolved. So if we're going to be adding this atomic state to the NgRx entity and whenever you use it, wouldn't it be awesome to use it in all the entities by default? So we don't have to create this special property. And if we're going to be using it in all the entities, well, it wouldn't be awesome to also reuse the selectors. So we don't have to create selectors for loading, loaded, and all these different states for each entity. So that's what we are going to be exploring today. So in order to make atomic the entity state, the first thing that we are going to do is to create the model. So we're going to create a model like I showed you before with the different request states that you can have. And here I added a couple of more states. Then based on that, we're going to extend the entity state that NgRx entity provides, and we're going to be creating this new atomic state where we add this request state where we're going to hold the state of the request. The second step is to add selectors. So now that we have all these different states, we can create these selectors for each of the states, like init, loading, resolved, and also for the error It can be the message or the code or whatever kind of error properties do you need. Finally, we're going to create the adapter. So this is exactly how NgRx entity is creating it, but we're creating a new adapter for this atomic state. And the difference is that it's going to include the request state property, and it's going to include also all the selectors that we previously created. So if we look at this, what is going to be the benefit or the difference between using the normal entity? So in the left side, I have the one that is using the entity state, and you can see that I had to be creating all the properties for the state and also setting the initial state. But whenever we use the atomic state, since that was already coded into it, we don't have to define anything. So then in the reducer, in the previous, we had to be keeping track of how we change the state and which one to change. But now with the atomic state, since it's a single property, we can just say, okay, now the request is resolved, or now it has an error, and so on, right? So we can start to see some of the benefits of this, but let's explore this into the selectors. So whenever for the selectors, whenever we use this atomic state, we will have to create the selectors for all these state request states, right? Like, does it is loading, is resolved, does it has an error? Like, we had to be creating this state, these selectors in each entity. But now, thanks to the atomic state, and since we already create the selectors, we don't have to do anything but other than defining which selectors do we need from the adapter, because the adapter already has all these selectors. So what is the value of all this, finally? Atomic state will allow you to have a single property for the state, and I think that's really beneficial because you don't have to be juggling and to see when to set one of the states and when to set the error and so on. And if you happen to enhance the entity state with this atomic state implementation, well, now you have less boilerplate and you will enforce consistency because you will have the same selectors everywhere and the same way to manipulate the state in all your entities. So I went really briefly around how it was implemented, but I have an example application. And if you go to my Twitter, you can see the post there and it will have a link to the repo and also an article describing all the things that I mentioned today. Yeah, thank you. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Alfredo. That was amazing. Actually, thank you to all of our speakers today. I mean this 100%. This has been easily one of my most favorite meetups ever. And it's because of just the efforts of everybody who spoke today.